Thank you all so much for joining us on this chilly, slightly rainy day in Syracuse, New York. This is a historic day in not in a good way. 2 years ago, we saw a violent attack on our Capitol and on our democracy. And 2 years later, the attacks continue. We continue to see anti-voter laws being introduced and passed across the country. We are now seeing, at some point, a new House majority that is prepared to launch sham investigations in replacement of the really hard work of the January 6th committee that helped unveil what happened on January 6th and what will be events leading up to that day. And we continue to have too many extremist politicians that are perpetuating the big lie and are sowing distrust in our elections. That are now in turn fueling threats to election workers and to other voters. So 2 years later, although there has been amazing work because of the January 6th committee to hold some of these bad actors accountable for what happens that day, we're still seeing threats to our democracy and our freedom to vote at every level across the country. So that's why we're here today, to remember what happened 2 years ago on January 6th, which was an unprecedented attack on the people of DC, on lawmakers, but to also draw the clear connection between these anti-democratic forces and what we're seeing at the state level in the form of these anti-voter laws, misinformation, voter intimidation, and also the secret money that fuels a lot of our elections and influences our lawmakers. So I really appreciate folks being here today to rally in support of that message. We're here outside of Senator Schumer's office. We know that Senator Schumer has been a leader on sweeping federal democracy reform and championed the Freedom to Vote Act and the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act last year. We're here today to encourage him, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, as well as President Biden to continue leading on this. And we're also here to hold other legislators accountable who have not been championing this issue and who are in turn exacerbating this issue. So really excited to be with you all today in solidarity with folks across the country that also at the same time are hosting these types of events and in Washington, D.C. So thank you all for being here. To kick things off, I'm going to introduce my very own Tom Keck from Indivisible and Sierra Solidarity Coalition to hear more.
Thanks, Christine. Thanks for coming out, everybody. So I'm Tom. I'm with NYS Solidarity and Indivisible Onondaga County. I'm also a political science professor up at SU, speaking on my own behalf, not for SU. They always like us to say that. I just wanted to say a couple quick words about the very beginning of the last 3 Congresses. Not just this week, not just 2 years ago, but also 4 years ago. I don't know if y'all remember that. 4 years ago, the congressional session opened in 2019 with the longest government shutdown in U.S. history, right? Go back to that time. Donald Trump was demanding that Congress fund his border wall. Congress was refusing to do so. Even the Republican-controlled Senate was refusing to do so. They just would not pass appropriations to fund the border wall, and he's like, well, I'm not going to sign any appropriations bill. And he had the support of a group of far-right members in the House, and I think it was about a month. It was from like late December to late January. The all non-essential operations of the federal government were continuing. Right? That was 4 years ago. 2 years ago, of course, we had the January 6th insurrection, right, where a violent mob inflamed by President Trump and orchestrated in part by a number of Republican members of Congress attacked Congress, brutally assaulting law enforcement officers in an effort to prevent Congress from certifying Joe Biden's electoral victory. And then this week, of course, right, the Republicans are unable to agree with themselves to nominate a speaker, which means that the House just can't function at all, right? None of them have been sworn in. Not just the new incoming members, but none of the 435 members of the House have been sworn in. The ones who are already members of Congress, that oath expired, right? Because the last 117th Congress is over. They got to get sworn in again. None of them have been sworn in. None of them can help out with constituent service. None of them can get classified intelligence briefings. None of them can obviously pass legislation or conduct either real or sham oversight hearings, right? They can't do anything, right? Because they can't agree on a leader. And the folks in the House, right, there's a small to medium-sized group of folks in the House who had their hands in like all three of these events, right? They are fundamentally hostile to the institutions of democratic government, right? They're not just like fighting for their like lower taxes or whatever it is that like normal Republicans fight for, right? They are like fundamentally hostile to the institutions of democratic government. If an election doesn't go their way at the polls with ordinary voters or in their own institution, right, with their own selves as voters, right, they just want to shut everything down. They want to make it so that democratic institutions cannot function, right? This is not sustainable. It's not acceptable. It's no way to run a respectable democracy, right? It is dangerous, right? There's national security implications, right? It is just not sustainable. Right? And so I know a lot of you all have been out here many times over the past year and 2 years and 4 years and 6 years, right? We know that Senator Schumer and Senator Gillibrand are most of the time listening to us and most of the time doing the right thing. We know that some good stuff's going to keep happening in the Senate over these next 2 years. Mostly they're just going to confirm a lot of judges, which is good. That's about all they're going to be able to do, but that's good. They're going to do a lot of that. The House is going to be a total mess. I was going to say a swear word, but the House is going to be a total mess for the next 2 years. And so let me just leave y'all with this, right? We, of course, have a new member of Congress here in Syracuse, Brandon Williams. He recently posted the locations of his offices. One of which is going to be in the Galleries building on the 7th floor, right where John Katko used to have his offices. So we know where it is. Lots of us spent a lot of time the past few years keeping an eye on John Katko. We should do the same with Brandon Williams, right? He is not, so far, one of the people trying to destroy the functioning of the House, right? He's supporting Kevin McCarthy for Speaker, but we got to keep an eye on him. We got to see what he's doing. We got to see what Kevin McCarthy himself has given up to the extremist caucus, right? And promising them to be in charge of committees and whatnot. And we got to see how much of that Representative Williams goes along with. I'm going to encourage everybody to keep an eye, a close eye on Representative Williams, and if he makes a vote, or if he does something, he says something publicly that you don't agree with, drop a letter to the editor, right? Say something publicly, post on social media, tell your friends who don't pay attention to politics about it, right? Show up at a meeting of CYSL there, your individual Onondaga County, or any other group of your choice. We got to hold Representative Williams' feet to the fire. He hasn't done anything yet. He hasn't even been sworn in yet. It is my strong impression that he is not going to be very representative of the diverse folks in this district. So we got to keep an eye on him. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Tom. Really appreciate you lifting up what's happening right now as the House votes again and again and again on McCarthy, and it's still scrambling to try to figure out their path forward. You mentioned a call to action potentially for holding Representative Williams accountable. Well, right now, as McCarthy works to get his votes to the Speaker, he has announced that he plans to gut the Office of Congressional Ethics. At the same time, the likes of Representative Santos are going to be sworn in, who was found to be lying about pretty much every detail of his life. And at the same time, the new House majority is trying to gut the Office of Congressional Ethics that is tasked with making sure that our members of Congress aren't doing things exactly like what George Santos was caught doing, lying and engaging in unethical behavior. This office, the OCE, has been bipartisan, has been reauthorized every year of the new Congress. What was one of the concessions that McCarthy has given to the extremist that Representative Williams opposes that, and that he speaks out to defend the Office of Congressional Ethics, which is really, really important, especially given what we're talking about today around January 6th. So, folks want more info on that, I'm happy to send you some tweets that I've seen going viral on this. It's a really important issue. All right, so with that, I want to also highlight the other impacts of what's happening on January 6th. We all know that Dustin Sarney has worked incredibly hard as our Board of Elections Commissioner. I've talked to not only Dustin, but folks across the country that work on our elections, and I have been heartbroken to hear about the threats that many of them have received from everyday people online, including 2 secretaries of state who personally told me that they experienced death threats because of the big lie and the discord that it fueled. So really excited to hear from Dustin, who's an expert on all things election, and his thoughts on this day.
All right, Dustin, what's this?
Thank you very much for having me. I'm Dustin Sarney. I am the Democratic Elections Commissioner. I'm here representing myself today as a citizen, because what happened on January 6th 2 years ago affected us as citizens. It was a gut shot to the bedrock of our own democracy. The free and fair transfer of power, the peaceful transfer of power that has been a staple of our democracy, no matter what we've gone through, no matter the incredible strife that we've had in our history. We've never had an insurrection on the day that the actual transfer of power was supposed to happen in our capital, and our capital was invaded. You know, I feel lucky because here in this community and here in New York, for the most part, we haven't seen the type of threats, we haven't seen the type of coercion that we've seen in other states, but there are still pockets here in New York State that we have seen this type of manifestation of election denialism. Just last year, we had a major lawsuit happening right around election time, around last time that we were here speaking, where Republicans statewide were trying to throw out absentee ballots here in New York, that and trying to coerce Republican elections commissioners to follow their lead. Luckily, they were able to resist, but that coercion happened. So I want to shout out to one of my favorite senators, Rachel May, who is about to put in a bill to protect election workers and to make it a felony for the penalties for engaging in this type of coercion or political threats. But I also want to talk about the root cause of why this is all happening. This is happening, and it's not just January 6th. It wasn't just with Donald Trump's election in 2016. This has been happening for generations because it is about othering people. It is about taking groups of people and saying they don't know how to choose leaders, so we're going to put systems in place to make sure that their will is not thwarted and our will is proclaimed. And that takes its form in white supremacy. It takes its form in ideological supremacy, where somehow a conservative ideology is better than a liberal ideology. And they don't know what they're doing, so we have to protect them from themselves and their votes. And of course, if the votes go the wrong way, it must be fraud. No evidence, but it must be fraud. And those type of lies have been going on for years. It took its root in voter ID laws. It took its root in segregation. It took its root in the horrible decisions of the Supreme Court in gutting the Voting Rights Act. And also Citizens United. All of this took its root well before the election of Donald Trump. And in 2012, the Republican Party did an autopsy where it said, hey, our policies aren't are bringing along certain minority groups, certain other groups. Maybe we should change some of our policies and do some outreach. And it was immediately thwarted with the Freedom Caucus rise in 2014 in that midterm, and then it continued to be just put aside in 2016 with Donald Trump. And that foundation is what led to January 6th. It's what, it led to, it birthed election denialism. Of course, birtherism with Obama that happened in 2008 was part of that as well. And then, of course, it birthed election denialism, which drove people into a frenzy, said that the election had to be fraudulent, had to be, had to be protested because it didn't go the way that they wanted. And then that led to January 6th and the coddling of these insurrectionists. And afterwards, we had a January 6th commission, and it had to be done by Democrats only, with a couple of Republicans, because the Republicans didn't want to take part in it because they wanted to put insurrectionists on the commission, and Nancy Pelosi said no. And so they didn't even want to get to the bottom of what happened January 6th. And now we see them talking about it being, it was just, a couple of rowdy people going wrong, all of this. And we saw in that January 6th Commission report that this was an orchestrated attack on our government. And if it wasn't for the work over the last 2 years of the January 6th Commission, we wouldn't know this. And now that we do, we see that the very same insurrectionists, the 20 or so House Republicans that are voting and putting this vote after vote and not allowing for a speaker to come forward, they were all election deniers. Many of them were coddling the insurrectionists that hit on January 6th. So this insurrection never stopped 2 years ago. It continues every day. Every day that they deny how bad it was. Every day that they votes to gut the Congressional Ethics Office, so they won't, it won't allow them to be investigated. Every day that this goes on and that people are not held accountable, and I'm not just talking about the rioters, I'm talking about the people who planned the incident, and yes, Donald J. Trump himself, who was at the fort. Our Justice Department is going to move at the speed that they have to move, but people need to be held accountable, or else we will never, we will have the January 6th for the next day.
That's right.
For our lives. So we need to continue to hold people accountable, and it's, there's some shot and fraud looking at the disaster that is happening up on the Hill right now, but it's also a disaster of our own. Staffers on January 13th will not be able to be paid if this isn't resolved. Real people are going to get hurt. We can't even pass bills. We have a debt ceiling limit in February. There's a lot of things that are coming down the line that our government needs, and these people don't care. They only care about their own power, and they only care about causing chaos in the system. So we have to hold them accountable. Yes, we have to go vote, but we have to do everything in between every election, and we have to vote in every election and in every race in this election. And we have to hold all of them accountable. Thank you.
I just want to underscore a point that Dustin kind of laid out, is that these legislators are unhinged. Poll after poll shows that when you ask the American people if they want their free vote protected and if they support policies to do that, across party lines, Americans overwhelmingly support those policies. And this past November, everywhere that democracy was on the ballot, from Michigan to municipalities like Portland and Oakland, democracy ballot measures and legislation performed extraordinarily well. So it's something that the American people wants. And these folks are pushing these anti-democratic pieces of legislation and misinformation are out of touch with everyday people. So first I want to just thank State Senator Rachel May for joining us. Before you kind of walk up, you just talked about the legislation that you're meeting on to protect election workers. Thank you so much for that. Excited to have Senator May here to share more. Love to invite you up to share some words today.
Yeah.
Thanks everybody for being here. So Monday will be our first real voting day in the Senate, and every year for the last 4 years, the first day has been Democracy Day. The first year we passed early voting, and we passed a whole lot of other really great election law to modernize our election system in New York State. And every year since then we have passed more, and so we have a bunch of legislation. It matters because we have to defend our democracy. Because, frankly, what Justin was talking about, Republicans care about power, but not about government. We passed some really basic, simple, obvious laws with zero Republican support because they really don't care about our democracy. And so it's up to us. I'm very proud of the work that we've done, but like Justin, it's scary. It's scary to see what's going on in Washington right now, because a lot of times it feels like there are no consequences for this kind of behavior where you are throwing our democracy under the bus. You're just trying to get what attention you can get, what power you can get.
Vote and have that vote be accessible to everybody. But what I've watched since I've been on the legislature is an amazing lack of support for local voting. Our BOE is staffed by a Republican commissioner and a Democrat commissioner. It is nonpartisan because voting has nothing to do with party affiliation. Everybody, whether you are a DSA member or a conservative Republican, everybody has the right to vote. And that's not being supported in our local county. Every year, the Board of Elections, everybody comes before the legislature for funding. The funding requests come from both Michelle Sardo and Dustin Sardo. It's bipartisan. They not only ask for the money, they say why they need it. And every year, their request is turned down. And the budget is reduced from what they are asking. And I'm not sure people pay attention to that fact. 2 years ago, right in the middle of the pandemic, 2020 election, crazy time nationally and also locally, our local elections went off without a hitch. 100%. That was November 2020. December of 2020, or maybe late November, they came in front of the legislature with their budget request. It was turned down, but not only was it turned down, the legislature wanted to reduce the salary of both commissioners. What is that about? So the compromise, as it was called, the compromise was that their salaries were frozen. They will never get another raise, no matter what. Now, it's not poverty wages. That's not the issue. They are the only commissioners, the only staff in the county government that has their wages frozen, the Board of Elections. So these are the kinds of things that are important for people to know. 2 years ago, I stood with Rachel and the other our state representatives, asking the county to add 10 voting sites. Many counties have 15, 20, 30 voting sites for early voting. We had 6. The answer was no, not until it became a law. So now we have a law that says 10, so we do 10. But instead of letting Michelle and Dustin decide based on voter participation where those sites should be, every year now every election they have to fight with the Republican majority on where those sites should be. So the opposition to access to the ballot is a national issue, but don't forget the local issue. It's really important that the word is spread that our participation in local elections is horrible. I mean, it's not great nationally either, but for national or federal elections. But for local elections, it's pathetic. And if people would recognize how important local elections are, it would translate to state and federal elections.
This is why we're trying to consolidate all the elections.
Exactly.
in here.
Exactly. Even here. And who's opposing that? You can all guess. It's like shocking that, again, every time you really think about what democracy is about, foundational to democracy is access to the ballot. That's where it all starts. And that's where it is impeded, whether it's local, state, or federal. So we can all have differences, whether you're Republican, Democrat, Green, independent. Policy discussions and debates are really good. They're part of democracy. Elections should have nothing to do with that. The ballot franchise is available to everybody. So vote every single November, and have bumper stickers. Tell your neighbors that when I do voter registration, people are shocked that we have elections every November. People think it's just a presidential election. So local elections matter, and please spread the word.
All right, I'm excited to introduce our next speaker, who's going to be our last speaker today, and then we will close out with the chant together. Maurice Brown has been a leader in our community at a number of issues for years. We're very fortunate to have him. And one of those issues is democracy and voting rights. Together we worked with our progressive organization Uplift Syracuse on a people's platform where we outlined kind of a lot of the community's values when it comes to democracy and voting rights. And I had the pleasure to work with Mo on the push for fair elections through our small donor matching program in the state legislature, where we will testify and did lots of organizing to build awareness of why that is so critical in terms of just ensuring that everyday people have an equal voice in our democracy, and that money in politics doesn't drown that out. So I'm really excited to invite Mo to come up and close it out.
Go Mo! Go Mo! Thank
He's the
you.
reason I'm on the legislature. And you voted for me.
No pressure. To those who don't know me, my name is Maurice Brown. I actually did Mary Kuhn's campaign once upon a time. But I'm the transportation chair for Uplift Syracuse. But today we're here to talk about democracy. I have so many thoughts. So many things came up, from the peaceful transfer of power and how it's important that there is a changeover. It's happening it happened federally, but locally we see signs of the same things. I won't go into too many details. Another thing that came up is that every election matters. It does. In 2018, Rachel May was elected. In 2019, she helped pass early voting. Could you imagine trying to do 2020 elections without early voting? Every election matters. We have to keep fighting. So I want to talk about January 6th because I have to. I do. It bothers me. I know you all have heard this talking point, but as a black man, I have to say, if the rioters looked like me, it would be a very different conversation we're having today. And I have a friend of mine who even shocked my eyes because he's Middle Eastern, and he said if the rioters looked like him, we would be having a very different conversation today. Very different. The Republicans want to write it off as like boys will be boys and let's just get over that, but we can't. People were killed. Like real damage was done to our democracy that day, and we're gonna fight back to restore that damage. We're gonna fight. So I took notes on my phone because I get really riled up, but it's very important. We need fair and safe transition. We need democracy. There's a reason that they hang out outside of polling stations intimidating folks. That's not a coincidence. They don't want you to vote. There's a reason that, we fight to get more early voting sites and they fight to take them away from us. If you look at, Mary mentioned it, Erie County, Dustin might have to correct me, I count 37.
I think that's right, yep.
They have 37 early voting sites. Granted, they have twice the population as us, but they should not have 4 times the amount of early voting sites. That's not a coincidence. We need to fight and protect our democracy on every level. Every election matters. They would kill me if I didn't mention the John Lewis Freedom to Vote Act that we need to pass through the 118th Congress. very important. We've made strides in the Senate, but the House is clearly in dysfunction. But just because they're in dysfunction doesn't mean we shouldn't still fight. We must fight. They want us to get tired. They want us to get worn out. That's why they're going to keep doing this vote. That's why they want us to get annoyed and frustrated and just throw our hands and walk away. But we won't. We're going to keep fighting. We're not going anywhere. We built this country, and we're going to fight for it. This democracy means a lot to us. This is our country. We cannot let them take it away. And if we don't fight back, they will. So I'm looking forward to fighting. I'm thankful to have folks on my team like Christine, like Dustin, like Mary, like all of you, because we need each other. I need you all to keep fighting, just like you need me to keep fighting. But thank you all for coming out here in this weather.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for being here today. We've heard about the numerous threats to our election, but just in summary, the threats to January 6th did not end on that day. As Mo mentioned, there were real costs that day, human life, and the belief in our democracy for a lot of, for too many Americans and for a lot of people. So it's really, really important that we continue to show up on days like today to remind the American public, to remind our elected leaders how important and also how fragile U.S. democracy is, and to make sure that we're continuing to make that connection between what happened that day and what's happening in communities and states across the country, because it is that same faction of extremist elected officials as well as political operatives that are pushing the big lie, that are introducing bills across this country that disproportionately disenfranchise communities of color from the ballots, that funnel secret money into our elections. It's all connected, and it's up to us to continue showing up, to continue calling on action to take place from our elected leaders in Washington to pass bills like the Freedom to Vote, John R. Lewis Act, as well as DC statehood, which would have been helpful on January 6th. And then also to continue supporting things locally. As Mary mentioned, making sure we're paying attention to what's happening with our early voting places, making sure that we are supporting our Board of Elections and election staff, and that we are continuing to do our movement. So thank you all so much for showing up and for continuing to be in this fight with us. I'm going to close this out with a chant. It's on your sign, so you can remember it. I'll shout our freedoms, and you say our vote. I'm going to close this out. Right. Our freedoms.
Our vote.
Our freedoms.
Our vote.
Our freedoms.
Our vote.
Our freedoms.
Our vote.
Our freedoms.
Our vote.